Bob, the question of the fine-tuned universe is a fascinating one. It's very probative of what our beliefs are, and I've talked to scientists and philosophers, theologians, very large number of opinions. There are people who believe it shows design for possibly some sort of a being, and it also elicits from many cosmologists now the multiple universe approach, where ours is just one of an infinite number of universes, so therefore is nothing special. From a theological perspective that you come from, how do you look at this fine-tuned universe, and particularly, how do you deal with the different kinds of arguments that people are giving about trying to explain it?
Right. Well, I don't use fine-tuning as an argument for God. A lot of folks do, as you said. And you can say that if you can argue there's only one universe and that there's no scientific reason for why the natural constants have the values they have and so on, then you have a sort of evidence for a designer, a God. And you can make a certain case. But of course, as you said, the response is, well, there are many universes. And for a long time, there were no scientific reasons for believing that. It was a purely metaphysical reason to kind of dodge the card argument. But now there are tons of them, brand universes, multiverses, and so on. So unless you, again, write off all those as not scientific, there's no evidence, which some people say, I think it's not quite true. I think you can make a pretty good case that we're part of a much larger multiverse. My point is that I never was interested in the fine-tuning as an argument for God in the first place, so that whole debate isn't very interesting, but it isn't really relevant. I think what it does show is quite the opposite, that if you believe that God creates the universe, or the multiverse of which ours is part, for the purpose of bringing about life and covenant and new creation, then the fine-tuning gives us a new sense of our being at home in this universe. It enhances our sense that God, however God got this universe to be, either from t equals 0 and fine-tuning or from a multiverse, this universe really is God's intention. It really is a universe where life is at home. Paul Davies makes this point, again, in a beautiful way, that physics isn't just there and the biology isn't a kind of accident. We as biological creatures are a clue to the way the universe is, to its meaning, to its purpose. So it's not an argument for God, it's an illumination of God's purposes in creating this universe. That is, it really is tuned for life. We're a signature of what the universe is about. So for those scientists who see the universe is purposeless and life is just a phenomena, my point is that it's quite the opposite. Life illuminates the kinds of physics you have.
So so this is then a question of appreciation as opposed to demonstration?
Yes, that you could say that. That's nice. It goes further than that, but first of all, it's to the glory of God the heavens proclaim. It's saying we as psychosomatic unities, we as biological, physical, psychological, spiritual creatures are very much a part and parcel of this universe, not just any physical universe. In fact, the more the multiverse is displayed, the more it shows how unique and extraordinary this universe is. And if you're in a desert, you see one palm tree, you don't say, oh, well, it doesn't matter because we're in a desert. You say, thank goodness, that's where the water is. That's where the importance is. The uniqueness of the palm tree shows you the importance of the palm tree. The uniqueness of the universe, however you get it, shows its importance. So it helps us understand God's purposes. But more than that, it does raise some interesting theological questions. If you say, well, what are those constants? Well, one of them is Planck's constant, the constant for quantum mechanics. It turns out that the value of Planck's constant plays a role in different parts of science. It plays a role in genetics because you wouldn't have evolution if you didn't have mutations, and that depends upon quantum mechanics. It also arguably plays a role in free will. You really couldn't act freely if there wasn't indeterminism in nature. And so in a certain sense, you can see God either solving two problems at once or God sort of combining these in a certain format. That is, giving this universe quantum mechanics with Heisenberg's constant as what it is, that is that fine-tuning, allows it to be a universe in which evolution will happen, and it allows it to be a universe in which when you get creatures that have self-consciousness, they will be able to act freely, and therefore they'll be able to act morally.
So you look at the fine-tuning universe as a way of understanding God's creation better and trying to harmonize a lot of other kinds of things that would be separate kinds of problems, whereas others would look at fine-tuning as whether it's an argument for God's existence or whether, therefore, it leads to a multiverse which does away with the need for God. And that argument, you're saying, I'm not interested in either side of that argument.
Right.
What I'm saying is I recognize the fact of the fine-tuned constants, and now what can I learn from that? Because I bring to this
Right.
a belief in God. I'm not inferring from it, I bring to it.
Exactly.
And therefore I can look at things like free will or God's intervention in the world, and what can I learn from all this?
Exactly. It's wonderful theologically because it takes very distinct and separate domains in theology, like the problem of free will and grace, or the problem of creation of life and evolution, or the problem of divine action in the world, which are, if you look at it from a theological perspective, are just different areas of conversation. You can talk about one without the other one.
It sounds like they're very different subjects, totally.
Exactly. And suddenly science says, well, they are different, but they have a common template in the way in which physics plays into them. That is, with the single selection of Planck's constant being what it is within the framework of quantum mechanics, you get the possibility of these 3 or 4 different areas of phenomena in human life, in God's action in the world, in evolution, which otherwise we wouldn't ever have thought to bring together and discuss. So it illuminates connections in science serves to enable theologians to find connections intellectually between different domains of discourse.
So here's an area where science not just is reflecting on this perennial question of whether or not God exists, which most people think, but can actually help distinguish between very deep problems in theology. So science has a rich contribution to theology.
Exactly. And again, it's not proving theology. As you said so beautifully, I'm not using science somehow to warrant theology. Although if it's severely challenged theology, that would take that very seriously. But right now, it's friend, not foe. It's saying, look, when you talk about how you enact free will, and you presuppose an open universe, not a Newtonian machine that you couldn't act freely in, but a universe which you really can't choose what to have for lunch, and therefore have moral consequences for your choice. Or you talk about how we got here, and you talk about evolution. Or you talk about human diversity, what's the common genome. Or you talk about God's action in the world that can act in the world to achieve specific events without violating the laws of nature. All those seem like very different conversations, different rooms in the, right, different classrooms in the university, but in fact, they all presuppose something which we never could have known before, except for this conversation with science. They all presuppose a specific form of quantum mechanics and a specific form or value, the fundamental constant, Planck's constant.
And what you're saying is by understanding that and how it deals with fine tuning, we can use that in each of these other issues at least to illuminate what are possible solutions.
Exactly. To shift the context a little bit to genetics, honoring of human diversity, right? Understanding God is acting through genetics, and recognizing that we have genetic defects and diseases that come from our genes seem like very different areas of discourse, but they all presuppose genetic mutations, and that presupposes quantum mechanics. So science, again, in this context, brings together very different issues about medical treatment, about human dignity, and about theistic evolution, which we didn't think were connected. So stepping back to the big picture again, the fine-tuning has been used typically for arguments for the existence of God, and then counter-arguments, well, fine-tuning is an obvious result of many universes, however you get that scientifically. Those are interesting arguments. I tend to take it in a different way. I tend to use fine-tuning to illuminate God's purposes in creating this universe, our sense of being grounded as persons in this universe and not being a kind of random accident of the universe. And also to see how it brings together different domains of discussion that are so important for theology and ethics. Domains around human free will. How do I act freely in the world? If the world were a machine, I couldn't, but if quantum mechanics and Planck's constant were correct, then maybe I can. It brings around questions about how did evolution occur? You need genetic mutation. That's ultimately a quantum mechanical process. Questions of how does God act in nature without violating the laws of nature? Again, quantum mechanics gives you an open world. And what about genetic diseases? Well, they're again somehow written through quantum mechanics. So without science, we wouldn't have known these 4, 5, 6 different areas of dialogue that are so crucial for theology have any internal connection. They would just be sort of different rooms in university, and you go to this classroom and discuss that issue. Science has come in and said, you can't reduce it to science, but science gives you a common template that the way quantum mechanics is, and in particular the fine-tuning of Planck's constant, provides a connection between, or the possibilities of, these different fields of discourse, which helps show their integrity as all part of the fine-tuning project.